for China's dominance globally. This particular program will speak to the old-fashioned kind of warfare, unfortunately, one that, if actually waged, would be immensely destructive, possibly nation-ending, and almost certainly with profound implications for the entire planet. Nuclear war is specifically the focus of today's program, and of particular concern, and therefore of special focus, is the evident conviction the Chinese Communist Party has that it can both wage and win a nuclear war. My old boss, Ronald Reagan, famously said that's not possible. It's not clear that the Chinese Communist Party, or for that matter, its allies, and to the great detriment, of course, of the United States of America and freedom-loving people more generally. We have arrayed a fabulous panel to discuss various aspects of this weighty topic. We are going to begin, as we often do in these programs, with a sort of an intelligence overview provided by one of our most, well, important and consequential intelligence analysts. That would be Captain James Fennell, United States Navy, retired. In his last duty station, Captain Fennell was the Chief of Intelligence and Information Operations for the U.S. Pacific Fleet, a vantage point from which he warned assiduously about the Chinese Communists' military buildup and other forms of warfare in which it was engaged against our country and those it was preparing to engage in the future. We caught up with Captain Fennell for an interview with our program Securing America on Real America's Voice earlier in the day. He was unable to participate live, but we are very grateful to him for allowing us, as he does from time to time, to extract content from a very important conversation for the purposes of both informing our television audience as well as those of you tuning in to our Committee on the Present Danger China's content. This particular interview, I think, was one of the most important of all that I have had the privilege of conducting with Captain Fennell, for reasons that we'll explore with you both in the course of this brief video, but also in the hour ahead. Let's go to the video with Captain Fennell now.
What happened on Monday, 6 July, at around just after noon in Chinese time, a Chinese ballistic missile submarine, estimated to be a Jin class type 094 Alpha, the improved variant of the Jin class, launched a submarine-launched ballistic missile, estimated to be the JL-3 variant, which is a 10,000 at least kilometer range, with up to 12 MIRVs, multiple independent reentry vehicles. They test launched that, and they flew it over 7,000, probably close to 8,000 kilometers into the South Pacific, southeast of the island of Nauru. They flew it over out of the South China Sea, probably just off the coast of Hong Kong, and it flew a trajectory that went past Palau, over Guam, over and through American territories of the Northern Marianas, and the Federated States of Micronesia, which are part of American territory, and then across deep into the South Pacific, which is the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone, by the way, which is a zone down there that they don't want to have this kind of testing. The test came on the 6th of July, a couple of days after our 4th of July, and a couple of days after Xi Jinping congratulated President Trump on our 250th anniversary. It also came the day or within hours after Australia and Fiji signed a new treaty, a defense treaty, oceans treaty, a free oceans treaty, a defense pact between those two nations. So there's some speculation in Australia that this was a signal to them. And it was also, this test came one day before July 7th, which is the Marco Polo Bridge incident that China likes, the PRC, the Chinese Communist Party, is remembering as the Japanese invasion of China that started World War II in Asia. So a lot of symbolism there, but the most important thing is that China test launched a capability that's useful for first strike nuclear doctrine. Since the People's Republic of China has been in existence and they have nuclear weapons since their first test in the early 50s, they have followed what they call a no first use policy, which is to say we will never fire first, we will only retaliate. And they have held to that. But in the last 2 years, they've conducted 2 nuclear ballistic missile tests. In 2024, they did a ground-based launch of an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile, also out into the South Pacific. And now here, in less than 2 years, they've done this submerged launch test. This is combined with what the former commander of U.S. Strategic Command said a couple of years ago. Admiral Richards said that China was having a nuclear breakout. And former Secretary of the Air Force, Frank Kendall, had stated was a dramatic increase in numbers by the Chinese in terms of their nuclear warheads. And then we saw in 2022 and 2023, China building out 300 to 350 ICBM silos inside China in western and central China. So China is building what they call their nuclear triad. And they have been focused on the ground-based silos for the last few years in terms of what's been getting the most publicity. But they have also been quietly building and working up their submerged launch ballistic missile naval capability. And this test was a statement and a demonstration that they have mastered that technology. Oh, by the way, the Pentagon's 2022 report to Congress on the PLA military power said that China was actively conducting SLBM patrols with their boomer fleet, most likely with the JL-2, a shorter range missile, and less MIRVs. So now they're actively demonstrated that they have an operational JL-3, and we know that they've also trotted out and built and developed and built and are operational now the H-20 strategic bomber. So we should expect here in the next year an H-20 nuclear test to demonstrate that they can fire an ICBM from an airplane, which would give them all 3 legs of the triad, which is clearly an unambiguous demonstration of their commitment to a first strike capability. Unfortunately, the press and many think tanks in Washington downplay this and only focus on second strike capability as if the Chinese were the aggrieved responding to a strike from the United States. But what the facts are on the ground, what the Chinese have been doing here just recently in this year, as noted by some experts like Tom Sugar, they've been conducting massive salvo launches of medium-range ballistic missiles, which would be the first kind of weapons used in a first strike capability. And so there's all kinds of indicators that China has shifted policy. And what's interesting, since this launch on the 6th of July, they have not stated anywhere in their press from the Chinese government, they have not used the words, we maintain a no first use policy. What they have said is that this test on Monday was routine, it was transparent, which it wasn't routine. They haven't ever done it before since the 80s. It wasn't transparent because they didn't notify people in time and the State Department said we didn't get prior notification in enough time and with specificity, so we don't know where it was going. We didn't get a broad ocean area, a BOA launch notification, which would tell us where it would hit. And they said it wasn't targeted against any one country. but we know that it was targeted against the United States. And they, again, have not denied, they have not reiterated the no first use policy. And what they demonstrated using a submarine is a classic first strike capability that they have now, and we need to respect. And the concern that I have, and I think many others in our network are, we have people in Congress that are actually trying to draw down America's nuclear arsenal, let alone the decrepit state that it's in from neglect from so many decades.
Captain Pinnell, thank you for this overview of the latest developments with respect to the Chinese Communist Party's missile program as part of its, well, massive nuclear build-out, breakout, if you will, and quite possibly its warfighting strategy, now revealed for what it actually is, not an assured second strike posture, let alone a minimum deterrence, but quite possibly the kind of capabilities that would give them the first strike option that we presume they've long sought. To understand further the nature of the Chinese Communist Party's capabilities and programs, as well as its policy attitude with respect to nuclear war fighting, I am privileged to be able to honor, yes, but also introduce a man that I have come to respect as arguably our nation's foremost expert on nuclear arms, efforts to control them through various negotiations and treaties, non-compliance that our adversaries have routinely engaged in, despite signing on to those treaties, and more broadly, the nature of what we must deter as it has evolved, including with, as I said earlier, the Russians throwing in with the Chinese in nuclear weapons exercises and threats to our country. His name is Dr. Mark Schneider. I could spend the rest of the hour going through his various roles in government, in basically all of the relevant national security agencies, including in the Department of Defense, as it was called at the time, where I had the very considerable privilege of working with Mark during the Reagan administration. He has subsequently continued to serve and now retired from public service, but is a senior analyst with a wonderful organization continuing to help the rest of us understand these sorts of policy and security challenges. It's called the National Institute for Public Policy. And Mark Schneider, thank you so much for finding time to share your extraordinary expertise on what the Chinese Communist Party's nuclear capabilities are at the moment, what they have in store, perhaps, but also what they have in mind for us with them. Welcome, sir. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. The Chinese, I think it's beyond any dispute right now that China is engaging in a massive nuclear weapons buildup. Nobody really challenges that. The only question, of course, is how fast it's going to happen. It's in the late, the first Trump administration, the 2018 Nuclear Posture Review, China was assessed to have about 200 nuclear warheads, and it was not expected to go up very substantially. Now, by 2024, China had reached over 600. The Pentagon projections, which I think are substantial understatements, project an increase to over 1,000 by 2030 and 1,500, although they haven't updated that number since, I think, 2022, by 2035. So I would take that as the maximum, or the minimum Chinese nuclear buildup. There are much higher estimates For example, Rick Fisher, who's I believe was the one of the best analysts in the country on China military nuclear capabilities, projects a possibility of as much as 6,000 to 8,000 Chinese nuclear warheads in the 2035 period. But even if it's only 1,500, they will have achieved virtual parity with the United States. And President Trump has actually stated in 2025 that they're going to achieve it in 2030. And I think that's very likely to be the case, that our official estimates, I think, are significant understatements of what the Chinese are doing and what they plan to do. Now, even again, if it's 1,500 warheads by 2035, we have a very serious threat, unprecedented. I think there's little doubt that current U.S. strategic nuclear forces and projected capabilities are not sufficient to deal with two peer competitors plus North Korea. To give you an example of this, this year, the Pentagon, for the first time, released an estimate of both China and Russian nuclear warhead numbers that exist today. And if you add the two numbers, it's something like 5,200 plus. How many do we have? Well, if you take the Federation of American Scientists analysis of what the United States has, it's 3-to-1. 3-to-1 Russian-Chinese advantage if you combine the two in total nuclear weapons capability. That's very frightening, and quite frankly, I doubt that anyone has told President Trump that particular little fact. Now, when you project, even if you take the projected rate of the Chinese buildup in the Pentagon's annual report on China, what you get is at a minimum a 4-to-1 Russian and Chinese advantage by 2035. And if you look at the higher estimates of what the Chinese are doing, you could have as much as a 5 or 6 fold difference in capabilities by 2035. And that doesn't even include the Russian nuclear buildup, which we don't have any official projections on in terms of deployed nuclear warhead numbers. But if you add the potential Russian upload capability, they have been violating the New START Treaty for 3 years before it ceased to exist by its own terms. But if you take a look at upload potential, you could get as much as 10 or 12-fold increase when you combine the Chinese and the Russian nuclear capabilities. So we are dealing with the possibility of opportunistic or even coordinated aggression between the two authoritarian, in the case of China, I would argue more than authoritarian states. And that has a really significant impact on U.S. national and even global security, because this could very well happen. Just take a look at what Putin is doing in Ukraine today, and all the reports in the last week or two that he may launch an attack on one of the or more than one, possibly of the bordering NATO states. So this is I think, a very, very significant national security threat. We have a U.S. modernization program underway. It will retain the current nuclear triad and improve it in terms of better bombers, better submarines. But it's not, unless the program is changed, it's not going to increase the number of deployed U.S. strategic nuclear forces. And when you take a look at the combined Russia, China, North Korea threat, we can't cover that threat with the nuclear forces that are still basically the legacy Joseph Biden program. And I think that's a very, very serious problem. It's not only numbers; it's diversity of capabilities. We eliminated in the 1990s mainly almost all of our tactical nuclear weapons. We have at most a few hundred gravity bombs, and we have a program for a nuclear sea-launched cruise missile, which won't become operational until 2034. So if there's any near-term China attack on Taiwan, or any type of coordinated China-Russia attack in their respective theaters, the modernization program, as it now exists, will provide virtually no capability, say in 2027, 2028. We're really talking about the beginning of upgrades in the early 2030s. And that's that's a very serious capability. Russia, for example, has a massive inventory of non-strategic or tactical nuclear weapons. There's more uncertainty about China, but there are lots of reports, including even some of the Defense Department reports, which have them possessing capabilities that we lack. Like, for example, they have nuclear hypersonic missiles. We don't have that. We're not going to have that under the current modernization program. So we are facing capabilities that give our two most powerful potential adversaries the ability to launch limited nuclear strikes of a type that we simply can't threaten to respond in kind, putting us in a position where we may have to escalate, and that's less credible than a in-kind response. So this is, I think, the sheer diversity of Russia and Chinese non-strategic nuclear capabilities, combined with the strategic nuclear buildup and the silo construction program, at least 370 new ICBM silos being built, the so-called underground Great Wall, which is a 5,000 kilometers of deep underground missile tunnels for operating mobile ICBMs, and the massive size of the China theater capability, which is both conventional and dual capable, at least in many cases. So we're dealing with a very large and growing threat, and I don't believe we are we're doing adequate things to deal with it. For example, Captain Fannell, in a, I think, brilliant testimony he delivered to one of the congressional committees, I guess about 3 years ago, characterized this as threat deflation. And I think that's very much what we continue to see out of the Pentagon and Defense Intelligence Agency. I think we're being manipulated by the Chinese through disinformation, and so we're not grasping the full implications of what the Chinese nuclear buildup is and what sort of capabilities it's going to give them, and the national security problems that it's going to create for us, and potentially in the not too distant future. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much. What a powerful exposition, and we're going to drill down on some aspects of it in our Q&A with you shortly. But before we do, I want to go to another video contribution, this one by, again, an extraordinarily accomplished public servant I've had the privilege of knowing and working with for the better part of 40 years now. His name is Robert Joseph. In his most recent public position, he was the Undersecretary of State for Arms Control, Proliferation Strategy, and Counter-Proliferation during the George W. Bush administration. He has, in various earlier moments of his career, been in the National Security Council. I think I've got that wrong. It was Arms Control and International Security is the title at the State Department. The role of counterproliferation and all that was during his time as a senior director at the National Security Council prior to his service at the state under W. He also was a senior official in the Defense Department, an ambassador with the Standing Consultative Commission, a man, in short, of extremely impressive credentials to talk in more detail about concerns that he has regarding the adequacy of our deterrent to this array of threats now from China and Russia combined. He was kind enough to give us the video, understanding that we would apply it here. He was unable to be with us live, so let us go to the videotape with Ambassador Robert Joseph now.
I agree with those who assess this latest test to be one more bit of evidence. That said, I think in and of itself, it's still a very significant event because as I understand it, this is the first test in a long time, but it's also the first test at full range. And the test was fired in the direction, no surprise here, of Guam. It's a clear signal, maybe a warning is a better word, a warning to the United States that China has developed a strategic capability that is at least equal to that of the United States, or that soon will be equal and maybe even superior to the United States. It's also very clearly a signal or a warning to our allies in the region, in particular to the Philippines and to Japan, and also primarily, I think, to Taiwan. China is determined to establish itself as the preeminent power in the Asia Pacific. And its expansion of its nuclear capability is clearly a central component of that plan, of that strategy. And we've been watching year after year at an accelerated rate of growth, the increase in their strategic capability, all three legs of their triad. When this began, they only had two legs, and now they have a full triad with their heavy bomber force and an ICBM force that, as I understand it, has more launchers than the United States. Mm-hmm. And of course, the Chinese production of weapons, the warheads themselves that go on these delivery systems, is totally opaque. So we can only believe that, unlike the United States, which has for decades relied on the stockpile stewardship program, trying to keep 1980s warheads viable, both reliable and safe, the Chinese have been developing new warheads. And so they have new delivery systems and new warheads and a clear capability that rivals ours and that is intended to undercut our deterrent capability. As for our deterrent capability, well, after the Cold War, we went to sleep. We lost our competence. We lost our operational competence. We lost our technical competence. And we lost our policy competence. Policymakers didn't even think in the context of nuclear war or nuclear deterrence. It simply went silent. Now that has begun to change. And ironically, as a consequence of the New START Treaty, an agreement on the New START Treaty, which was a terrible treaty, but that's another topic, we did receive funding for the modernization of our triad, our submarines, our ICBM force, and our heavy bomber force. But that's taking years. And when it finally begins to produce actual fielded equipment, I think what you'll be looking at is old new equipment. Because while we are recreating, refinancing our triad, a triad that was created in the context of the Soviet Union and the Soviet threat that their nuclear force posed to us and to our allies. China has been modernizing not just the delivery systems, not just the warheads, but developing new capabilities. In fact, at the theater level, China has, until recently at least, 95% of the INF missile capability globally. I mean, it's a formidable force. It's a force that's designed to undercut our deterrent. And I think this latest test is just a signal that they're coming. If this isn't a wake-up call, I don't know what is. It's clearly not just about delivery systems. And as I said, we lost our technical competence in the nuclear field. You'll remember that we had 3 what were called nuclear laboratories, Los Alamos, Livermore, and Sandia. Well, after the Cold War, they became, quote, national security laboratories. And we lost the ability to design nuclear weapons, and we stopped testing. We haven't tested a nuclear weapon since 1992. And I think that has had a very detrimental effect, not only on our stockpile and the reliability and the safety and the effectiveness of those weapons, but on our ability to think about designing new weapons for what is a new environment. This is not the Soviet Union. This is a world in which we have 2 peer nations, 2 peer adversaries, Russia and China, that either separately or combined represent a much different threat than the Soviet threat. And that's not even taking into account North Korea and likely, unless we change policy, Iran in the future. Because I think the Iranians have determined that nuclear weapons are essential for their survival. And the North Koreans almost say that every day. And they're building nuclear weapons as fast as they can, with the estimate by RAND of potentially over 200 nuclear weapons in the North Korean stockpile by next year. That's a blink of an eye. And we're simply not prepared at the strategic level or at the theater level, and we haven't talked about theater nuclear capabilities, to deal with those threats. I think we're far behind the curve. As I said, things look better now than they did before, but that's only by comparison with where we were 20 years ago when we were going backwards on our nuclear capability. There's a lot of room for improvement, and it's not just improvement. I think it's an urgent requirement driven by our national security interests and the threats that are posed to us. I think the distinction between theater and strategic is rather arbitrary. I think it was a distinction that was made in the context of arms control, where we said that strategic was a weapon that was delivered by a system, whether it be a submarine launched ballistic missile or an ICBM or a heavy bomber that went more than 5,500 kilometers. It was a convenient way of not having to address the very complex situation with regard to theater forces, particularly in the context of monitoring and verification. At that time, we had in Europe, just the United States, over 7,200 nuclear weapons in Europe, theater systems that would not go more than 5,500 kilometers. Today, we have a few hundred. And that was the consequence of the end of the Cold War and a decision made by the President of the United States, George Bush at the time, George Herbert Walker Bush, the first President Bush, that we would, in combination with our Russian colleagues, no longer the threat, but we would both drive down significantly, substantially, the number of theater nuclear weapons. Well, we did. We went down 95%, and the Russians didn't. And today, the Russians have a huge capability advantage over us in theater systems. And it does matter, because even though you have this distinction that, as I said, is rather arbitrary, any nuclear weapon use is going to be strategic. And we have failed, other than to develop more modern gravity bombs for our dual capable aircraft in Europe. We have failed to deploy new systems, to design new systems. In fact, for a good part of the post-Cold War period, our laboratories, now national security laboratories, not nuclear weapons laboratories, were told that they couldn't even think about how new nuclear weapons designs. I mean, this was driven by the arms control agenda gone wild. That seems to have tempered a significant amount, but still, we have that legacy, and we don't have the foresight. I don't think we have the vision that we require in order to keep up with the threats that we face. Our adversaries think about nuclear weapons all the time and how those weapons might be used, not just in the context of a battle plan, but how they can be used for coercion, how they can be used to intimidate their neighbors, how they can be used to deter the United States from coming to the assistance of our allies. And we haven't gone through that thought process. It's better now than before, but we've got a long way to go.
Mr. Secretary, thank you. Again, much food for thought, and we will bat some of these insights around in our final segment. But before we do, we are delighted to have with us, as we quite frequently are privileged to do, the chairman of the Committee on the Present Danger of China, Brian T. Kennedy, a man who formerly ran the Claremont Institute as its president and is now the president of the American Strategy Group. He is the author, among others, of China's War Within America. He is both a scholar and a gentleman, but one who has in particular made a life's work of trying to protect the people of the United States against nuclear attack, both by promoting, as we've been discussing, the sort of offensive nuclear deterrent we require, but also missile defenses that we largely are still unable to field. He has been arguing persuasively for quite some time that we need to do that from space. We've asked Brian Kennedy to join us to sort of round out this conversation and introduce into the mix the need for missile defense as well. Thank you for joining us, Mr. President. Over to you.
Thank you, Frank. Great to be with you as always. And let me just say from the outset just how impressive those remarks were by Mark Schneider and Bob Joseph and Jim Fennell. That really was a tour de force on the state of play here. One would discern from listening to them that America is not quite serious today about our own national defense. How we as a great nation could have let ourselves strategically get into that position is really something of a national embarrassment. I think part of our problem today is that so much of Washington, not President Trump, but so much of the rest of the establishment doesn't believe nuclear war is possible. They don't believe war with China is even possible. Yes, they're preparing for war. Yes, they're having this nuclear buildup and otherwise military buildup, but that overall war is not possible. And so we don't really need to take these things all that seriously. President Trump does take that seriously. Hopefully he's building a military establishment within the Pentagon that will take it seriously, but we're only now seeing evidence of that, and unfortunately, I think still too slow when it comes to the development of our offensive nuclear forces and our missile defenses. The president has talked about the Golden Dome. It's part of his basic strategic program to build missile defenses. He very much believes in them. He very much, a lot like Ronald Reagan, doesn't like nuclear weapons, has talked very much in Reagan-like terms about getting rid of nuclear weapons. I mean, the president says a lot of things just to test them out, but he doesn't like the idea of nuclear weapons, doesn't want the planet engaged in nuclear war, and so has taken the building of missile defenses seriously. By all accounts, we're working very hard on that. It's 2 years in, however, and we don't have any real systems fielded yet. There is a lot of talk about various designs. I'm hearing good things come out about a system similar to Brilliant Pebbles that may be developed. There's a lot of talk about various boost phase intercept type of systems that we could be developing. But we need to be explaining to the American people just how much needs to be done on this. These are the kind of programs that should be worked on 24/7 to make sure that they could be eventually brought to fruition much quicker than what our current time frame is. Frank, you and I have been in meetings for 20 years where we've heard this or that about missile defense, and they're always on these long time horizons, and they're not designed to deal with either the Chinese threat or the Russian threat, but they're one-off programs. Our land-based system today really is designed for North Korea, and even that, a very limited number of North Korean missiles. So one wonders just how serious we are as a nation, how committed we are as a nation. Today, the Chinese, as Mark Schneider laid out, are building offensive nuclear weapons. They're also building missile defenses. We don't know exactly the level of their missile defense program, but we do know or believe that the Russians still have what the Soviets had developed as their missile defense program. And at the time, this number is always a bit controversial, but at the time it was thought that the Russians had 7,000 to 8,000 nuclear-tipped interceptors protecting Russia. Most of it would protect Moscow, but it would also protect about 75% of the Russian population. Now that's an extraordinary kind of number when it comes to missile defense interceptors, all of them nuclear tipped. And when you study any of that, you realize the Russians plan to win a nuclear war, not just to turn nuclear war, but actually win nuclear war if it came to that. And this is something that the United States has not thought through. We're the ones who did not believe that nuclear war was possible and that we weren't going to build missile defenses to match whatever the Russians were going to do. Now, the Russians, always denied having that many interceptors, of course, but that doesn't mean that they didn't build them. And in the face of all that, the United States, which is defending a free people here in this country, did a great service. We as a country have done a great disservice to the American people, not producing missile defenses to match the Russians, and now today the Chinese. My own view, I'll sum it up with this, is that the Chinese would, I think, in the short run, first of all, they're going to build nuclear weapons simply to match the United States. They think that's absolutely necessary when it comes to war fighting. That's on the one hand. They also believe that America is a paper tiger. They think nuclear weapons, they've used that phrase before about nuclear weapons, that they're a paper tiger. And remember in 1957, I think it was, Chairman Mao said, well, something to the effect of, well, they can't kill all of us. And you can kill half the planet, I think he said, and we would still have enough people to rebuild. They think of themselves as fighting a war, and they're willing to expend the lives of the Chinese people to win that war. We don't think in those terms. We're not thinking about what happens if war comes and what that means. And so we need to reorient our thinking that we are in a war with communist China. and that we need to win that war. And these nuclear weapons are not symbolic. They're real things that need to be addressed. The president and his team need to understand that and explain all these things, if need be, to the American people to make sure we're building the missile defenses that we need and the offensive nuclear forces, if it comes to that. Finally, when it comes to Iran, I think the Chinese would rather have Iran as a surrogate launching a nuclear weapons attack against us than, if need be, having to launch from their own soil, which is one reason why the Chinese and the Russians have been supporting Iran and North Korea in their nuclear program for 30 years. So the conflict we're in today in Iran is born in, the halls of Beijing and Moscow. They want Iran to have that nuclear capability. They want to make sure that Iran has the ability, if need be, to launch a surprise attack against the United States. I and others on this committee have laid out the scenario of a ship-launched ballistic missile from Iran against the United States. And if you ever did that with a EMP weapon, a nuclear warhead that was used as an EMP weapon, that all by itself could destroy the United States. Are we building missile defenses to stop that potential? Are we hardening the grid against that type of attack? Taking these things seriously is something that this committee has been designed to highlight and to explain to the American people. And it's my sincere hope that we're going to take as a country this more seriously, and to make sure that this missile defense system that we've been discussing is a reality, and it's not merely rhetoric that will make part of the conservative base of the country happy. We actually need to defend the American people, because we have enemies today, as we always have, who mean our destruction. And until we take that seriously, I fear we live in even greater peril than we should. So thank you, Frank, and thank you to all the people who've been part of this webinar.
Brian, thank you. A very important contribution to it. I want to come back to this issue that we've touched on several times, Mark, with you initially. You mentioned this great underground wall of China, some 3,000 kilometers or miles in length, hardened tunnels connecting various facilities, the exact use of which we know not. But I'm just very anxious to have your thoughts on what it bespeaks about the intentions of the Chinese Communist Party. That at a time when they were professing to be, into minimal deterrence and only having a couple hundred warheads, they were pouring unimaginably vast amounts of money into building this complex, and I'm told by some, maybe thousands of other underground facilities in which to hide, presumably, nuclear weapons capabilities, manufacturing capabilities for them, and the like, and God only knows what else. But could you address, Mark, the question of what does this tell us about the intentions of the Chinese Communist Party vis-a-vis something both you and Robert Joseph and Brian Kennedy have all spoken to, namely, are we similarly serious about the nature of this kind of warfare and preparing for
it? The Chinese objective, I believe, is very simply to dominate the world. It's a combination of Chinese nationalism, which they have been stroking for a few decades now, and Xi's revival of ideological communism. In the long run, that'll hurt China, but in the short run, it could strengthen its military capabilities. Now, China, of course, has a vast population. I think the current estimate's 1.3 billion. It has an economy which gross national product approximately the size of Germany or Britain or France, but its overall power is far beyond that. because of the nature of the regime and the resources it devotes toward the military. And, you know, in the last I think starting in the early 1990s with the demise of the Soviet Union, it changed significantly its policy on nuclear weapons, started developing the systems that we now see deployed or under test. And that, I think, has a very, very significant impact. We could very easily get into a war with China. They are doing things now in the first island chain and beyond it that is very, very has great military capability potentially associated with some of these activities, and I think at some point they're going to use it. I think Xi is very serious about Taiwan. He may outweigh Trump. He may hope you have a much weaker follow-on president, and that despite what the rhetoric you hear from people, that type of president is not likely to do much if they were to actually launch an invasion of Taiwan. By the way, Bill Gertz ran a very interesting story. Maybe 2-3 days ago, the Chinese, he says, are building new silos, not for ICBMs, but for theater range ballistic missiles. And the intent and capabilities of those silos is to allow them to launch massive prompt missile attacks in the theater. And, you know, the obvious target right now, or number one target, is Taiwan, but it's more than Taiwan. It's the Philippines, it's Japan, it's Australia. But I think if this story is true, and Bill Gertz has a very good track record, that we're seeing an actual part of the preparations for an actual attack on Taiwan. We haven't seen anything like this before.
Yeah. This is very much top of mind, I think, for those of us at the Committee on the Present Danger of China, that capabilities are now coming together that are increasingly indicative of the intention, not only in the abstract and not only in some point in the future, but perhaps very much in the near term to move against Taiwan. And in fact, if Jim were here, we would talk about something we did on the television show, Securing America, earlier today, namely that the Chinese are now putting into place and exercising, not just, you know, in the sense of dress rehearsals, as they've been called, but actual operational activity with their Coast Guard and so-called marine militia east of Taiwan, beginning to challenge ships passing through those waters, all of which strongly smacks of the beginnings of a quarantine or blockade, even if it's going to be incrementally installed. Brian, I wanted to get your thoughts on this too. You both have worked a lot over the years, as have I, on arms control, and I just would be interested in first your thoughts and then Mark's on how we've seen arms control used by particularly the Soviet Union and then the Russians to a somewhat lesser degree, just because they generally don't get into these things. But the Chinese have participated in some arms control, multilateral arms control agreements as well. First of all, as a vehicle for masking what they're doing, despite the so-called transparency that would be associated with inspection regimes and, you know, the techniques that we would have to monitor compliance. Mark Schneider knows more about non-compliance by these guys than anybody on the planet. But the extent to which it has actually resulted in them securing measurable advantages in terms of force structure and capabilities. Mark went through some ratios that are just staggering, especially if they represent the combined forces of the Russians and Chinese. 3-to-1, 4-to-1, 6-to-1, perhaps. Talk a little bit about your sense of all this as an instrument of public policy, Brian Kennedy.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Frank. My own take is that almost all arms control has been an exercise in self-deception on the part of the United States. The idea that communist totalitarian nations would somehow abide by agreements that were going to limit their ability to wage war seems like utter folly. We in America have this self-delusion that they're going to comply with them. We don't have a perfect window into everything that goes on in those countries. We don't have a perfect window today. However good our intelligence capabilities are, we don't have a perfect window into China or Russia or even Iran or certainly North Korea. Yeah. And so the idea that we would have agreements that we really couldn't verify. You can have compliance regimes, but those can be, worked around if you were the other side, and they have been. This has been among the most foolish things this country has engaged in, these many years. And it's been a kind of immorality on the part of the United States that we would leave the American people, when it comes to missile defense, vulnerable to attack. And when it comes to the building of offensive nuclear weapons, that we would not have a force that could both win a war but deter a war. We've engaged in a lot of self-deception, and that's an unfortunate thing. Let me add, Frank, that this point about Taiwan is an important one. If you look at the mentality of President Trump and President Xi, President Trump wakes up every day figuring out how to make the lives of the American people better, more secure, more prosperous, and he has a wide range of things he has to deal with in order to achieve that. Sometimes he does, sometimes there's great successes, sometimes, there's a lot of things he's still working on. But that's his main goal. President Xi, or Secretary Xi, more properly, he wakes up every day, I believe, thinking about, how do I take Taiwan? He has an apparatus to control the lives of the Chinese people. He has an engine to go and build the Chinese economy. He wakes up every day, though, thinking, how do I take Taiwan? Maybe not today, but tomorrow or the next day. And he's taking steps today to make it so. And we, on the other hand, just look at that and think, well, he may or may not do it. And, the Chinese are patient and they're probably not going to do that. This idea of threat deflation that Jim Fennell has spoken about and that Mark mentioned is a very real thing in Washington. And we have to be much more mindful of the immediate threat that's being presented to us.
Amen. Mark, would you like to say something just on the record with respect to arms control and non-compliance on the part of these regimes?
Yes,
and how they've turned them to advantage?
Russia, in particular, has a very bad record of non-compliance with arms control agreements. They've literally violated every major arms control treaty that they've ever signed. In terms of what we know about Russia through arms control inspections, you've got to keep in mind that the last New START treaty inspection was in March 2020. And when we wanted to resume inspections, they were suspended because of the COVID epidemic. We wanted to renew this in 2022. They refused and simply violated the treaty for the remainder of its duration. In 2023, they announced that they had, quote, suspended the treaty. So in effect, we have not had a arms control treaty with Russia since, in effect, 2022. The New START treaty had a very weak verification regime, much less than the original START treaty, and that after March 2020, we lost inspections. In 2023, when they suspended it, we lost literally the entire New START treaty verification regime. So there's not, I mean, the number of deployed Russian nuclear weapons on the strategic missiles is uncertain. They may have uploaded covertly. They certainly have had enough time to do that. If they have, you could have numbers like 2,000 higher than they are normally given credit for in most Western publications, and that this is a very significant problem. As for China and arms control, I was involved in the arms control business for maybe 25 years or more, at levels from the office director up to acting deputy assistant secretary and actually a negotiator in Geneva for 5 years as a representative secretary of defense. I have never met a Chinese arms control diplomat. That tells you something about how much arms control they actually do. Right. And they have consistently refused to engage in any negotiation regard to the limitation or reduction of nuclear forces. And I expect that to continue indefinitely.
Mark, I did want to ask you before we have to wrap up, and I think we're just about there, to talk about one exception to that general rule. The Chinese Communist Party, doing business as the government of China, of course, did enter into the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. There is, as I understand it, again, you're one of the world's great experts on this subject, that they almost certainly have cheated on that. Robert Joseph mentioned that they've been building new nuclear weapons. We're muddling along trying to keep our 1980s vintage ones going. The question that I just, you wrote a stupendously important piece for the National Institute for Public Policy last year, in which you made the case for resuming nuclear testing. Could you just briefly describe both the environment we're in terms of other nations, specifically the Russians and Chinese, assuredly doing low-level nuclear testing at a minimum, and the importance of us having that capability to assure we have confidence in the weapons that we have in our arsenal, not to be confused with the delivery systems. That's a whole different thing, and that's where the modernization is all taking place, as I understand it, not the business end of what they are delivering.
Well, to address your second question first, it's of absolutely critical importance. If anyone advanced the arguments for the anti-nuclear testing crowd against resumed nuclear testing, we'd be, if you applied it to anything else, you'd be laughed at. No weapon system is introduced into service in any normal development program without extensive testing and follow-up testing of the finished product first. Again, we haven't done that since 1992, and we've made numerous changes to U.S. nuclear weapons since then. And the one thing we learned in the 1958 to 1961 nuclear testing moratorium is that our opinion about the reliability our weapons, and even with the extensive computer modeling and the other non-nuclear tests that we do, is dubious. After the 3-year moratorium, we found we stockpiled at least 4 weapons that had very serious reliability problems. And one of them, which, by the way, was the Polaris missile warhead, one of the most important weapons we had during the Cuban Missile Crisis, was essentially a dud. So to bring that into the present, the weapons we have today are much smaller, much more optimized than anything we had during 58 to 61. But they're also, because of uniquely high safety requirements for our nuclear weapons compared to just about any other country except maybe Britain, who uses U.S. designs, we pay a price in robustness of the designs. That's inevitable. I mean, there's really no way to get around that, and that's one of the reasons you need nuclear testing. Now, for China, China initially continued nuclear testing after the United States and Russia ceased in 1991, 1992 period. They tested through 1996, and according to a Chinese expatriate who works today at the Harvard Belfer Center, they basically closed 80 to 90% of the gap between their technology and ours by 1996 due to nuclear testing. Now, we now know, thanks to the president's statement and follow-ups from various people in the administration, that the Chinese have been doing covert nuclear testing, and these have been in yield ranges up to literally hundreds of tons. Well, what does that mean? Well, there's a report of a very distinguished group called the Jasons. It's Mitra Corporation runs it, and it concluded that if you test at a half kiloton, you can do some very critical reliability tests. In other words, test the weapon to establish that the fission trigger, or what we call the primary in the nuclear weapons business, actually works. That the fission reaction burns deuterium tritium, boosts the yield, and you get full primary yield, which means you're probably going to get pretty close to full yield, design yield of a thermonuclear weapon. And we now know that they've been testing at yields up to several hundred tons of TNT, which means that the new designs that they've introduced after 1996, and they almost certainly have that, have been subject to at least that level of nuclear testing. On top of that, they stole the family jewels, literally vast amounts of information about U.S. nuclear weapons designs, and according to the Cox Committee report, quite possibly the design codes that we had in the time period that we designed all of current U.S. nuclear weapons. And that's a very, very serious problem, and it's made a major contribution to the Chinese nuclear buildup, while the United States trying to work around this with other technical approaches has proven very costly and of uncertain effectiveness. Yeah. We really don't know for sure whether or not we stockpiled a dud. As we did during
and deploy for that
1958
matter.
moratorium.
Yeah. Mark, there's so much more to talk about in this respect, and I'm anxious to continue the conversation with you, both in this series and otherwise soon. But I did want to come back to Brian Kennedy before we close. Brian, you have I think, got very considerable influence inside the senior reaches of the Trump administration. The observation has been made, I don't know if we can say it for 100% certitude, that the president may not be fully briefed on what we've just exposed here. That the comments that he's made, including fairly recently, as I recall, about our nuclear arsenal being second to none and the best in the world, and that he's modernized it all and so on. I think really cries out for a much more careful treatment of this subject, especially if what we've been told here is that the Chinese Communist Party and the Soviet counterpart, Russian counterpart, in terms of their nuclear arsenals, have both been modernized extensively. They've been subjected to covert underground testing. They've been improved over time, as have their delivery systems in ways that ours simply have not. That we may well find ourselves in a position where not only is there an even more urgent need than might have otherwise been the case for missile defense, but that the need for modernizing our arsenal, including the weapons atop it, which will require us to do at least some level of testing of nuclear weapons for the purpose, as well as really reconstituting, as Bob Joseph has said, the nuclear weapons laboratory system that is a core part of the kind of nuclear infrastructure, as it's called, the weapons complex. These are things that I hope that it might be possible through your good offices, as well as through this particular webinar, to urgently entreat the administration to take stock and become more forthright about the importance of nuclear deterrence in this very dangerous world, and redoubling our efforts to assure we have a deterrent that is safe and effective and especially reliable. Your thoughts, sir?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Frank. Look, as everyone knows, I'm a huge supporter of President Trump. I do believe he understands just how serious this is. Whether he uses rhetoric at any moment to actually match the seriousness of our nuclear and strategic deficiencies, most of the time he doesn't. Partly not to worry the American people, I think, and partly to keep our enemies guessing on just what's going on. We do have a fair amount of military programs that are not publicly known that are being engaged in today. The president will often say we have very serious weapons that no one knows about that we're capable of deploying. I certainly hope that's so. I don't know that it's so, but I hope it's so. But at a minimum, the president is committed to making sure that we have nuclear forces that are excellent and that can deter any adversary. He is committed publicly when it comes to the Golden Dome and building missile defenses. I do believe he personally understands these things, but it's going from his understanding to building an administration that can actually get it done in a timely way that I worry about, and that he should be worrying about, and that you and I and others have been focusing on. Are we working 24/7 today to build missile defenses? Are we working 24/7 today to modernize our nuclear forces? Are we working 24/7 when it comes to building the kind of theater offensive and defensive forces we'll need in the Gulf, or when it comes to Taiwan? The numbers of certain, not very advanced weapons I heard recently, offensive, cruise missiles and the like, were almost pathetic. we're building 12 of a certain type of missile today, and they said in 4 years, this briefing I got, in 4 years we'll have 400% more. Well, that's only 48. So, we need to be upping the industrial capacity of the United States. That's something the president's working on. He's also trying to buy time while he's building that industrial base. And so the fact that we went to war in Iran, and we did so because the president firmly believes they cannot have a nuclear weapon, that he understands the severity of nuclear weapons, is something that gives me a great deal of hope that he's getting these other things right. But we do need to explain to the American people in the interim just what these deficiencies are and just how much needs to be done in the short run to get us, not even better than our opponents, but, at least as good as we say we are. The idea that we haven't, as Mark just laid out, the idea that we haven't tested our nuclear weapons is it defies common sense. You say any of that to the American people, and they'll just be thinking, this is not a good or serious country, and that we have to get this right. So there's a lot to do. The administration's doing much of it, but much, much, much more needs to be done, Frank.
Thank you, Brian. And it starts with, I think, as you've sort of implied there, being honest with the American people. And yes, you don't want to panic them. You don't want to tip off your enemy to, conditions that they might be able to exploit. Those are, just facts that have to be navigated. But it does seem to me, in terms of the takeaway from this incredibly important and insightful presentation, every single one of our contributors has made a major contribution to this basic bottom line for me. There is arguably no more important job for our national security than dissuading enemies of our country, who unfortunately abound, that it is not worth the risk to them to attack us, especially with these kinds of unbelievably powerful weapons. But for that matter, others as well. Chemical weapons, mass destruction weapons of the radioactive kind, the biological kind. We have abundant reason to believe the Chinese are beavering away at all of these. In fact, they've used chemical weapons extensively in the form of fentanyl, and now new, even more powerful opioids called nitazenes. They've used biological weaponry against us in the form of COVID. And they may well be preparing to use nuclear weapons against us as well. To deter that prospect, that horrific possibility, requires, I think, getting serious once again about the nuclear enterprise and beginning afresh with the institutions that are necessary to support it, the laboratories, the various elements of the nuclear weapons production, manufacturing complex, such as they are. And again, one of the great things about having Mark Schneider as a participant in this has been he's actually worked in the agencies responsible for all of this, going back to the Joint Atomic Energy Commission, for heaven's sakes, to say nothing of its various successors, including now the Department of Energy. This kind of expertise is urgently needed. I pray that the takeaway for you, our audience, from all of this is that you need to be letting people who represent you or are seeking your votes know that this is of great urgency and of importance to you. If that is done, I think you will see some corrective action taken, which is long overdue. It is indeed, as you said, Brian, shocking that this could possibly have gotten to the point that it has. And I think it is also true, as you said, that if the American people are apprised of the fact that since 1992, we have not tested a single nuclear weapon in a realistic underground, albeit low-yield explosive fashion, and our enemies have, and are continuing to do so. And that as a result, we may be undermining confidence, our own, but also theirs, in our deterrent posture. And this requires urgent corrective action. So we urge President Trump to be about that, and his team to be honest with him and the American people about both the challenges ahead and what's needed to rectify them. I want to thank each and every one of you, Captain Jim Fennell, Dr. Mark Schneider, Undersecretary Robert Joseph, and President and Chairman of our Committee on the President Danger, Brian Kennedy, for these incredibly important contributions to this incredibly important program. And we urge all of you to help us get it around to people who have a need to know, which I think is just about every one of our countrymen and women. God bless you all, and God bless America.